I'm Steven. What am I doing today? We're going to build this tricycle I bought on overstock.com for my wife. First look, it comes in a nice sized box. Let's open it up and see what's inside. Start to remove that. And we'll begin to see all the components. This must be the basket. Then we see the bicycles, the tires, basic frame, all wrapped up, keeping it nice and safe. They've zip tied the fender to tires. That keeps the fenders from getting bent up. Makes a nice way to pack them as well. Handlebars, all wrapped up. Tire pump. And the basic frame and the seat. So they've wrapped everything very neatly, keep it from getting scratched and damaged in transit. All looks pretty good. Looks like this bag must have the rear axle. This particular variety is a 7-speed. You see all the sprockets. This box is probably the one that scares most people, because I'm sure it has all the little parts and the screws in it, and hopefully the actual instructions. I guess it comes with a bike lock. Nice. So a set of Allen wrenches to help you put it together. Nice. This must be the instruction book. Reflectors. Pedals. I'll need those for a little bit. And the chain. Put it. Oh, one more tool to help put it together. Let's see what the instruction manual says. So the first page says we're going to need the derailleur, which doesn't sound good, but that's this piece. That's the piece that moves the chain when you shift the gears to the various cogs. We're going to need the tool they gave us, and it tells us where to put this on. So we're going to put this piece on there. Now, just to show you, when it came, the screw was already in the place, but it wasn't firmly seated in. So I'll point out, you notice it has those little tabs. You'll notice on here how there are little tabs. So first make sure that the screw seats firmly in the way that it's supposed to. And if you're wondering, the part with the little pattern here, the dimple pattern, that's going to face the metal. That's to keep it from moving. You'll see it smooth on this side. With this snapped in place, you see that the bolt fits down smoothly. You'll see how the tabs are hugging the inside. That's to keep it in place while you screw it in. And then we're going to put it on right here. Based on the picture, looks like we want it standing up. So we're going to hold it just like this when we put it in. So as you get this in place, you'll notice the rear has a little hold onto it. If you come from this side, you'll see how there's a flat edge. So when this is in place, that's going to catch right on the end of that. Now we just have to tighten it down. It says we're finished when the effect looks like this. So go over to the one that I just put on, and I think that means we're finished. Step 2 says we're going to attach the wheels, or a wheel, to the back axle. And we're going to, so we'll need the wheels. I have those here. These rear axle plugs, the little plastic covers to keep it from snagging on anything. and an adjustable wrench, which I found. So now we will follow these instructions. First, it tells us to determine the left and right wheels based upon the shape of the screw hole. Then, given that, we will put it on either side, fit it on the assembly, put in the gasket, then the nut, and finally tighten with a wrench. Put the metal tubing over the left axis before the left wheel, and then the same operation as with the right wheel. And put the plug on it. So let's see if we can get that done. This one with the circular axle entrance is going to be the left wheel. This one with the square or rectangle is going to be the right wheel. And then when we look at the actual axle, you'll see that the rectangle one applies to this side, and the circular one will apply to that side. And there's the metal sleeve it also told us to insert. So they have the pieces partially, they have them assembled in the place where they're going to go. So we have to take those off, put the wheels on, and then put those back in. The left wheel has this little metal piece collar that fits on before the wheel, and then it's bolted on. The right wheel, which they had us do first, has a square that wheel went into. Now we just have to tap on our sprocket or our covers. Covers are on the bolts of the wheel. It's supposed to look like this, according to this. Good. On to step 3. Now for step 3, we're going to attach the frame to the rear axle. It says we'll need the wrench tool they gave us, as well as our adjustable wrench. And we're going to first, one end of the chain passes through the guide. Then we're going to have it on upside down. We figure out where those attach. Then, that's a clearer display, it says. Okay, we're going to use the multifunction wrench and an adjustable wrench to tighten those down. We're going to tighten the first screw, tighten the second screw. 4 screws are all tightened, and then we will be finished like this. Now, during the unpacking, I would caution that as you remove the packing, just be careful, don't go crazy with your knife. You do have a couple of cables that are going to be for the gear shift and the brake. You want to make sure you don't nick those accidentally. So use care as you take the plastic wrap off. That was to keep your frame nicely painted. This axle on the bottom here is just temporary in order to maintain the spacing. We'll have to remove this before we put it together, as you see in their pictures here. Here I'll point out, you'll notice on these screws that they have kind of a square head on the inside. Now that doesn't fit through the hole here, so this is designed to fit in this slot, so that when you tighten it down, the square fits on the inside, and that holds it while you tighten the lug nuts. Now before we start tightening this down, you'll see we slid it in where the rear part slid over the bolts. Now the picture only shows one, but I have 2 bolts on this one. And then this front bolt is the one that had the square end on it. So if you look, you see the square and how that fits into the slot. So when you tighten it down, then it won't turn. Same for this side. See, the square end will go right in there. Now I'll point out, as you tighten these, you'll notice, see, there's a little bit of gap between the metal. Obviously you're going to pinch that down, so you'll know you have it tight when you bring it all together like this. And you may want to tighten one down, not as hard as you can, but snug, then move on to the next one, and move on to the next one, and then come back and finish tightening them down as snug as you can. I guess I should point out one discrepancy between the instructions and the actual bike that I have. And that is, it shows you when you're tightening them down to use the multi-tool on one side to hold the nut and your adjustable wrench on the other side. But point in fact is the ones that I have these carriage bolts, and the carriage bolts have a square end. So you don't have to have anything hold this side. So all you're using is your adjustable wrench to tighten them down. At the end of step 3, it says to set the bicycle upright, which I have done, and remove the rest of the safety packing to help protect the finish. We're ready to move on to step 4. Step 4 is about installing the chain. It says we'll need the bike frame, which we just set up, the chain, and this chain tool. And we see we have this here. I will point out, you should work, just don't be aggressive at straightening out your chain. If you get a double kink in it somewhere, just be gentle, go back and forth until you get it worked out. You don't want to tie it in a knot. But this begins to show you how you go through one end of the guide wheel, or you're going to go around the sprocket. It says to go through the smallest first, then you pull it forward, you go over your pedal sprocket, you're going to bring the two ends together, you're going to put one end of the chain into the other. In the tool, you see where it's mashing the piece in, and then as you tighten that down, it puts the little peg between the chain in order to have it finished. So the chain comes with this last peg extended, and so you're going to put it through this hole into that chain, and then the tool is used to clamp this little bar in all the way so that you have a solid chain when you're done. Now you'll see there's this little plastic bit covering the sprocket here. That was to keep the sprocket from getting damaged in transit. So we'll want to remove the screw so that we can take the safety bit out. And on the little handy dandy tool they gave you, there's a Phillips head right here that'll fit right into that. So you see I removed that. I put the screw back in, although not all the way, because that's going to be used, I'm sure, when we put the cover guard over this later. Before we get too much further here with the chain, when you put this on, it initially will be in this position, but realize this is spring loaded because it has to have some tension on it. So you need to move this forward, and this is the way that you're going to load the chain on it when it's in this position, so that maintains the tension on the spring. And because as it adjusts up and down the gears, you'll see the sprockets are different size, so the chain has a little bit of play in it. So this is made to take up that play. So when you're in the high gear or the low gear, this will move back and forth. As you start, I think it's easier to start with your chain over the sprocket with a length, because that'll help you control the tension. If you just try to wrestle one end of it without it being stretched out, then that's when you start getting into knot positions and those kind of things. So start with it like this, and then follow the instructions, go around the cog, S-shape through the tension, and then we'll join them together. Okay, a couple of quick things. One, since you're dealing with tension on this, it can be hard to figure out how you're going to attach the chain together, because the links don't come, and when you pull on it, it's going to be difficult. So I use a little bungee. Just put a little bungee to hold that while you're running through it. You'll also notice these guards. So the chain runs under the guard on this side. There's a back guard over here, so the chain runs on the sprocket side of that, always on the sprocket side, past the guard, around your rear sprocket, through the frame. Make sure you don't get your chain tied up in your bungee. Then it comes over here to the main sprocket. Now what I'll point out over here is that, remember, you have these guards that's going to go on the outside. So make sure you have your chain inside the guard, and then you have your two ends are nice and loose now, so we'll be able to put the tool on it and tighten that down. You'll see there's a place for the chain to run, then there's that end that'll fit against the edge, outside the edge of the chain. This is the end that's going to push. You see, you tighten this down like a little vise. So once we have our chain in place, then we'll just tighten this down until it pushes the peg in. Now I want to point this out. When you start to put this in, you may find that because this peg is already sticking out a little bit, it won't quite, try to get focus here, it won't quite fit in. So what I did is I actually started with the inside part, which is a little thinner. So take the hole past the peg, push it in, and then pull back gently until the friction gets it in the right place. So now we're ready to put the tool on it in order to tighten that peg down. So you'll see I used the little guide barbs here. So I have that on either side. I tightened this down just a little bit in order to hold the pressure on the outside. So now I'm ready to tighten the other side to force that in. You see I've tightened it now. Now when it gets close, it's going to get tighter because it's trying to push the peg through the other side of the chain. So you don't want to push it all the way through, but you have to drive it down until it looks like it's set the same way the others are. So that's about right. And once you remove your bungee, you'll see the spring action of this picks back up again. And if I go in reverse, you'll see everything is clicking along the way it's supposed to. So I think that's the end of step 2. Step 4, as you might guess, step 5 is going to use our multi-tool again for the Phillips end in order to put the chain cover on. So just as we thought, the screw that we removed before, we'll take that out. There's one at the top. Put the chain guard in place, put the bolts back on, and we'll be done. Now when putting this on, I first would suggest, don't pinch any wires that might be in the way, but put the screw on back here loosely. You'll see it has some play in it, and then that will let you adjust the front as needed in order to get your screw in here and here. So that was the end of step 5. Step 6. Now we're going to install the front fender. So we're going to need the fender, these little pieces that hold it in place, and then where we put it on. You see how it attaches in the front up at the fork. Then it has these rear ones that attach down at the bottom of the fork, and that holds it into place. A couple things to pay attention to. When you're going to put the fender on, you'll note in the diagram that the first part goes in the front of the bike. Now, if you have this upside down, you may not be paying attention, but it will be important because when you have the fender on the right way, the bars will meet up with it out here. If you have it the wrong way, then you're going to see it's trying to pull against the outside of the bar. So make sure your handlebars are turned the right direction, and then do your installation. Okay, on to step 7. So we need the end caps for the axle. This is the front wheel assembly, our adjustable wrench. Look at the instructions. This will be an important point to note that the washers have a tab that fit in a little hole. That's to make sure they stay in position. Pretty straightforward. I will point out they're shipped with these little booties on these, so you need to take those off first. And it also already has a cap on that one. But so these little booties are just to help protect the ends during shipping. The other thing, this one came partially assembled already. with the cables in place. So obviously before we put the wheel on, we need to take this loose to get this out of the way. Okay, now we're ready. Okay, one other thing I noticed was this one came partially assembled, so it already has the brake pads and things in place, although they're in a vertical position, and that is not going to be right, I don't think. But in order to make it easier to get the tire on, I'm going to loosen these so I can let those flip around until we're ready to adjust the brakes. So they have a little adjustment screw here on the back. We just have to loosen that up. You'll see it turns around, and then once we have those loosened up, we'll be able to get the tire on to tighten it on. Now, as noted, you need to make sure that you've taken these off so that when you put the wheel on, you put the washer so that the lock goes in the hole, and then you begin to tighten them down. Another precautionary thing I'll point out is that when you begin to tighten these, you'll notice that when you reach a certain point, when you turn this side, that the other side is turning as you tighten it. So it's important to have 2 wrenches, or to tighten both sides a little bit at the time so that you begin to get them where they won't spin against the other side. See, there you go. One of the things it cautions you about here in this step is to make sure there's no friction between the tire and the fender. Now, the fender piece, it's a piece of lightweight metal. Let's not overstate it. I mean, it can be bent, and these could be a bent in transportation. So just make sure that you look at it, make sure there's no contact between the tire and any of the fender parts. If there are, then just a little light pressure one direction or the other will probably help bend that back into place. Make sure those are seated well. The other thing that we haven't got to these steps yet, but the adjustment of the brakes. So you'll notice that is a little bit close right now. I had to loosen the wire a little bit so to let that open up a little, but it just spins freely right now. So when we get to the brake adjustment, we'll make sure we have those right. But the key at this step is just to make sure the tire spins without encountering any friction along the way. Step 8. This is having us put on the bell and reflectors. So we're going to need the parts that are mentioned, as well as our tool. Here's the bell. It also points out the tire reflectors, but on this model, the reflectors were already in place on the tire. So we may just have to test that they're adjusted properly. Now I will point out on this step, for putting on the bells and reflectors, that it has you working on parts you haven't put on the bicycle yet. So the bell's going to go on the handlebar, which I have unwrapped here, and the reflectors are going to go on the rear fenders, which I have unwrapped here. So carefully, if you haven't already, take your wrapping off of those carefully. Try not to scratch them. The only part, as I said, these were already on the tires, so I will just check those. And then this one goes on the neck, where the handlebar goes, which is currently right here on the front of the bike. So these parts we're going to put together, and then subsequent chapters will have us put these parts on the bicycle. When it comes to the bell, you take the screw out, you put the loop around the handlebar. The instructions specifically told you to put it on the right side, but it'll just as easily go on the left. I think the key is to make sure that the striker is in a position where you can reach it easily. Obviously on the other side, the striker would move in the other direction. But If you're left-handed and you feel more comfortable with your left thumb, then try it on the other side. You can easily take this off and move it later. I'll point out something here just to make sure it's clear. You'll notice when we're putting the rear fender on with the reflector, it points at the two holes that are on the back. On this model, you'll see the two holes is a circular one and a rectangular one. If you look at this, then you'll see that there's the nut area, and then there's a little clip here. See that? So when you put this in, the clip is going to fit in the bottom hole, like so, and then you tighten it down. Now the instructions don't spend a lot of time talking about the tool they gave you, but so I'll just point it out. It has a number of hex tools. So this works like a Swiss Army knife. If I could do it one-handed, you just bend up the appropriate one for the size of the item that you're dealing with. The rest of them you leave in place. But I should also point out that on the other side, this particular tool comes with one. This has some various hex nut tighteners on it, that handle. There's also flathead screwdriver, Phillips head screwdriver, and this is a driver head. So if you see these sockets underneath, you can take those off that fit the appropriate nut, and then you put it on the end of this driver in order to drive that in. So it's pretty neat. They gave you a nice tool that has all the little attachment gadgets you're going to need. Everything except an adjustable wrench for the larger size. One of the complaints that I saw online, people talk about these fenders being very lightweight and flimsy. But remember, the fender it's not a bumper like a car where you're going to hit something with. It's to deflect material that might fly off the wheels. So you don't want to add a lot of weight to your bicycle. So that's why these are very lightweight. So if you get yours comes and it has a little bit of ding in it, you can just very easily move it back out with your hand. So just bend it back into place. It'll be fine. So just be careful when you're putting them on and don't twist them unnecessarily. The next step is going to have us finish with the rear fenders. You'll notice they're showing you the detailed installation here. But the first step will be to attach these additional supports to the actual fender. And so the way these came are like this. You'll notice yours may have the nuts already in the holes and you'll have to take those loose in order to put them on, or they may have come in a separate packet of envelope. So you're just looking for those, and then you want to follow the instructions as far as how to place these on. One of the things I'll point out here when you're on fender assembly is you notice these nuts have the hexes on the bottom, and they have a little rounded top on them, if you want to call it a top. So it'll be important to put it on the right way when you put it on. This is because this has a little seal inside of it to help it stay tight so it doesn't come loose while you're riding and stuff. So this doesn't have a washer per se, but there's a little nylon insert inside there. So just make sure you put the nut on the right way when you tighten it down. And I like to start with the center. Here's something I think I should point out. The diagram, as you notice, doesn't show the previous step where you put the reflectors on. But if you look very carefully, you'll see in this bottom diagram how the two holes where you put the reflector on are facing toward the back. So it's important to note that because one of these fits on each side of the vehicle, you want to make sure that you put them on opposite sides from each other. So otherwise, if you put them on, then one of your reflectors is going to be facing the wrong way. So you'll notice this one, I put it on so that the arm is on the left side when the reflector is facing me, and I put this one on with the arm facing the right side with the reflector facing me. Very important thing to note. Now, not mentioned in the instructions, but As I pointed out, these particular bolts have a little nylon washer, I guess you'd call it, on the inside to help them stay tight. So this might be a case where you need an additional pair of pliers to hold the bolt on the inside while you screw it in. Otherwise, it's pretty hard to hold with your fingers while you try to screw that down. So get an additional pair of pliers in order to pinch that nut while you screw it in from the other side. This is a piece where you probably need a longer Phillips head screwdriver than the tool they gave you, because basically they have you reaching through the spokes in order to reach the Phillips head. So the fender piece goes on this side. You'll notice the nut and washer go on this side. So hunt up a longer screwdriver when you get to this step. Now, this is another case where there might be some bending in transport. So if the fender doesn't exactly line up the way you need, then you can give it some gentle pressure to get it where it needs to be. Step 10 is going to be the installation of the handlebars. So we'll need our appropriate hex tool that will fit in the end of the handlebar to tighten the adjustment, and that's about it. Now, I'll point out a couple of things. It's shipped with a little safety plastic right here, so this will have to come off. The other thing to note is that the handlebars themselves have adjustments forward and back and stuff. So depending on how you're shipped, you may need to loosen this nut first, enough so that you can twist the handlebars around so they'll be more convenient for you to put them in. And then just lightly tighten that one back until we get to the part where you might adjust this for your own comfort. So first, we'll take this off, and then we'll follow the instructions about inserting this and tightening it down. Okay, it just occurred to me that the little plastic insert that they put on, they may have actually tightened the end cap first. So first loosen this, and then the little plastic should be easier to come off. This just shows you what is inside there. So there's a nut, a bolt that runs all the way through the shaft here to this tensioner at the bottom. So with it loose, it'll fit down through your handlebars. And then as you begin to tighten it, this will move up and slide along that edge there until it grips the inside of the post on the bicycle and keeps your handlebars in place. As I told you before, we loosened the bolt on the outside that adjusts which direction the handlebars are. I just wanted to point out, you see these little groove lines, and you don't see any on this side. So that means my handlebars need to come a little bit one way or the other. Just try to get them centered before you tighten them back down into position. Next comes the seat, and you'll see that we'll need this bar, came with it, the seat itself, and the little multi-tool here. First, it has you putting the bar, see there's a thinner end, into the seat here, and then we'll tighten this part on before we go on to the step of inserting it into the bicycle itself, or the tricycle. Okay, I'll point out that as you can use the multi-tool on one side to hold one nut while you use your adjustable wrench on the other side, and you're clamping this down to make this firm. Now, you don't have to keep clamping. You see there's a lot of room here. You don't have to keep clamping until you crush the pipe. That's not the goal. The goal is for this to be firm so that your seat doesn't wiggle when you're sitting on it. So just get it down nice and snug, and then we'll move on to the next step. Okay, now to put the seat on, you'll notice you have this attachment. This is so you can make some quick adjustments if you need to. This stays on at all times, but it's the same principle. It pinches this down in order to hold the seat. And then if we look at the seat bar, you'll notice the little grooves cut in it. So you want to put it in at least as far as those grooves to make contact. And then based on your height, you'll adjust the seat up or down to be comfortable. But this can be done at your leisure, and even between different riders by using the adjustment rod at the bottom. Finally, I'll point out, as it says here in the last step, you can adjust the angle of the saddle, the seat, by again loosening it where it attached to the bar, and then tilting the seat forward or back to whatever your comfort level is, and then retightening it. Next step is the pedals, and as it points out, the pedals themselves are marked for left and right. If we look at them, we can see our little emblems in here. One has an L, one has an R, so that tells you which side they go on. Pretty straightforward. One thing I'll point out is that when it comes to pedals, the left one actually screws in the opposite direction to the other one, and this has to do with trying to make sure that it doesn't come loose while you're riding and stuff. So this one turns counterclockwise, where the right side was clockwise. Now we come to the step where we're going to install the front brakes. Now, between the brakes and the shifter cable, this is probably, I'll call it the trickiest part. But if you just pay attention to the instructions, it's pretty straightforward. Now, as I said, mine arrived with at least part of the brakes pre-assembled, so I had to loosen the bit a little bit in order to get the tire on. You'll notice they show you that it is shipped with them in the upright position, but when we get to the next page and we look, it'll talk about the correct alignment. So see, it's supposed to be hitting on the rim of the tire, not the tire itself, not at an angle, and make sure that it fully contacts the rim. So there's various adjustment screws for that. But the first part is just to attach the cable to the right hand brake. So that is done with by stretching the cable up and seeing that little block. That block then fits inside the arm, so that when you press the level, it pulls on that block, which tightens the clamp down to brake level. To get started, I first had to loosen the brake on the other side so that the cable would come free. Just don't pull it until the cable comes all the way out. You just want to pull enough so you have plenty of stem on this side. Then when you come to the brake, if we open it up, you'll see this is the part where the block will go in. So we'll put the block in there, like so. Then we just have to press it back so that we can pull the block back on the inside and get it all to line up. All right, and that's how you attach it there. And then we'll attach it back down here again in order to do the adjustment for the tightness. So I have the brake on. I have it so the wheel will turn freely when you mash the handle. Then it clamps down on it. So you have to loosen this, pinch them together until you reach the right level of adjustment, keep holding it, and then use the hex nut in order to drive this on the socket nut till it's nice and tight. You want that really tight because you don't want this cable to pull through when you want to stop. So you want the wheel to be able to turn freely when the brake is not pressed, but clamp securely when it is. Next step is installing the shifter cable. Now, this one, you see the cable is already wound up right here. It's going to have us straighten that out. Then we're going to find the cable that runs along and back towards the shifter area, and we're going to feed that cable through there until it reaches the back. As you begin to do your shifter cable and you unloosen it, remember to be slow and methodical as you do it. You don't want any kinks in this. Just so there's no confusion, when you have straightened out your cables, you'll notice you have two. One has the little nut on the end. That's going to be your brake cable. So the one you're looking for is the one that doesn't have a feed through it at the moment. Okay, one thing I'll point out as we get started, I'm sure it's probably covered on one of these, is that, remember when I had us put the chain on, it told you to put it on the lowest sprocket. The smaller the sprocket, the higher the gear. So this is a 7-speed. That means the little sprocket is the 7-speed. So as you feed that cable through, double check what your setting is here to make sure that we're at the highest speed. So there's 6, there's 7. So make sure this is set to 7, because when you start gearing back down and you want to go to a lower gear, you want to make sure that the cable is turning the right direction. So the cable just feeds in, and then it inserts into the end of the gear knob right there. The other end comes out back here, out the other end of the cable right here, and then this is going to go into your gear shifter right here in order to pull this so that the gears go up and down. So depending on how your bicycle came, you'll notice here's the cable where the gear shifter is coming. It runs through some little guide tubes at various places. Here's a guide tube here. So, sorry for the shakiness. We want to take this and make sure we run the cable through this until we can pull some of the plastic through it as well, because the plastic end really needs to reach all the way back to right here. I want to point out, as you're bringing your cabling back for your shifter, it's going to go inside of this bar, and then we're going to feed it through here, and then this is the clamp. So we want to go ahead and loosen this so that as we feed it through, we can go ahead and get the threading start. Because if I run it through to here and then have to feed it through, it's going to be, I might get a kink in it. So I want to feed it through until I can get the plastic end all the way down into the cup here. Now that I have the plastic all the way to the cup, you'll notice a couple of adjustments here. So like if this can be loosened or tightened in order to give some fine tuning to this. So I don't know if there's a recommendation for how far in or out it should be to start with. I'm going to leave it in the position it currently has, and then I'll decide afterwards if it should be adjusted a little bit differently. This is then what tightens along the cable. So it fits under this little clamp here, and then we'll tighten that down in order to secure it. One thing you'll notice after I have this tightened on here, you have a good bit of cable left. You don't want to leave that dangling. That's going to snag on something and cause you a problem. So this is where you'll use your crimping tool, your wire cutters, and you want to cut this off. But don't cut it too short. Leave a nice length, a nice enough length to where you can make some other adjustments if you need. You just don't want it to be long enough to get snagged into the chain gear, or certainly not enough to get over toward the wheel. So just a couple of inches extra, and then we'll cut that off. So this ends with talking about adjusting the shifter knob. Depending on your model, you have to make sure your cable is tight. Then there's a couple of screws in case the derailleur needs to be moved left or right, a little fine tuning. But we'll worry about that as when we get ready to take our first ride. We'll check the adjustments there. So in the meantime, I think we're ready to move on to the next step, which is probably installing the action rear brakes. So it's going to be much, at the start of it, it's going to be much like the front brakes. We're going to insert the bar into the handle the way that it needs to be. Then we'll come back here to the back and we'll look at the actual brake mechanism in the rear. As with the front brake, once we have the bar in place and we feed it up through here, we could tighten this little adjustment down to hold that in place. And we want to feed the plastic back to the insertion point. Just like that. All right, similar to the shifter, when we have that cable in place, we want to bring this back here. This will feed through, let me get your angle better, the feed tube here. This is going to be the lock nut back here. And so we want to make sure that the plastic end, or in this case it has a little metal tip, securely goes into the block like that before we tighten down the cable. I turned it up just to show you how this brake works. As your wheel turns and you're riding down the road, you'll notice it's turning this inside item here. So this brake actually pulls on a belt. There's a belt that circles this. So as you clamp the brake, it tightens on this area right here. So much like the shifter, we're going to feed this through the insert here, and then it'll go into the clamp back here. But there's also one other important step that we'll get to in just a second. Now you'll notice I have the cable inserted until the tip is inside the cup. But before we put this into the clamp, they gave us this spring. And the spring goes over the cable and fits between here and here. So I'll have to take this off while I do the adjustment. Let's put this through the clamp, and then we'll adjust the spring into the right place. There. So now I have this running through the clamp. I haven't tightened it down yet. But to show you how this works, when your wheels turn, you'll notice the axle has this additional item in here, and this has a belt. This brake has a belt that runs along the outside of that, and as you clamp the handbrake, it pulls this back, which will clamp down on this. So the adjustment for this is going to be some of these items in here to make sure that we can tighten this down, and then that'll hold the axle. And the final step appears to be to put the basket together. It shows you where it's going to fit on the rear. There's some bolts already on the vehicle that we'll have to take off. The basket kind of folds together, it looks like. And then you'll use the bolts through these braces in the bottom to hold the bottom. And then it has these little plastic bolts to help hold it together in the side there. There she is, fully assembled. Overall time, I don't know, as I was shooting this video, I guess I spent maybe 4 hours on it. So if you're not doing a video, you probably could finish it in a little less time than that. But the more important than time is just to follow the instructions and make sure that you get the pieces in the right place. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe to see what Steven's doing.
I want to ride my tricycle. I want to ride my trike. I want to ride my tricycle. I want to ride it where I like. Tricycle, tricycle, tricycle.